Hello, my friends. I'm your host, Samantha, and welcome to the Mooncast. Today, I wanted to share with you my experience on leaving Christianity. I feel that one of my main goals, maybe even what drives me to have an online presence and to make podcasts, is the untangling of fear and witchcraft. Firstly, for those who have been led to believe witchcraft is malevolent, but even more so for other witches, especially new witches who are still carrying around past influences and thought patterns. I've done podcasts before about fear and how it does not serve us. I've talked about how the idea of harmful spirits and demons are one way to keep us from realizing our own power. But I've been hesitant to talk about how I feel modern Christianity has both created and helped stoke the fires of fear in our modern society. Before I begin talking about this mindset, I firstly want to address my thoughts towards Christians. I know there are as many kinds of Christians as there are kinds of witches, and never want to lump them all together into one basket. I know many Christians who simply want to live as Jesus taught them, with kindness, love, and community. But I also know there are proclaimed Christians that do not walk this path and use this sacred spirituality to further their own prejudices and sow fear into others. And because of a lack of understanding and education, many feel just as well adopting what these charlatans are suggesting. You will never hear me say Christianity is bad or evil. It is a legitimate spiritual path that nourishes and inspires many people. And it is not for me to decide another spiritual connection. But if you are here and listening to this podcast, you are not here to listen to me validate Christianity. You're probably here because, like for me, it just did not fill your spirit. Perhaps you're looking for solidarity and support, and would just like to hear the story of how another person left Christianity. So that is what I'm going to do today. Obviously, at one point in my life, I was a Christian. As I've said before, my mother was a Christian, and when she went to church, I went to church. Now, I have always been a spiritual person, even at a very young age. I remember during sermons trying to find the clearest piece of stained glass I could look through and see the trees in the courtyard of our church. I wanted to be among them, climbing their limbs and smelling the earth. Sometimes all I could make out were their silhouettes through the different blues, reds, and greens of the stained glass. And one of my biggest gripes as a small child was that I had to wear a dress and little-heeled shoes, which made tree climbing very difficult. And I was especially perturbed on Easter when I was made to wear a hat with an elastic strap that, because of an unknown allergy at the time, would leave little welts under my chin and on my neck. Now, I know Easter fashion does not a religion make, but in this case I feel it's a perfect metaphor for how I felt in Christianity. Confined, restricted, and very uncomfortable. I tried very hard to be a good Christian as a child. I read my Bible, went to church, and listened intently to my Sunday school teacher. I even went to Bible camp one year, but try as I might, it just didn't click with me. So, as time went on, I became a Christian by default. If I was asked, I was a Christian, but there was no real connection to be had for me. I found no connection in the Bible. I didn't go to church, and had essentially abandoned the idea except as a social descriptor. I did all of this by the time I was about 10 or 11 years old. And there was a lot to unpack once I left Christianity officially. It took years to recognize behaviors and thought process that had been with me for so long. I didn't have a large family, so coming out of the broom closet was relatively simple for me. The only resistance I got was from my grandmother, who told my mother who was very supportive, that she shouldn't buy me those books because she would encourage me. Those books being mostly anything written by Scott Cunningham. My grandmother was a Christian and slept with a very Caucasian picture of Jesus above her bed. But she was also born in 1914, just 2 years after the Titanic sank. Now, she was an artist and a very progressive for a woman of her time. I spent hours at the university art studio with her, learning to appreciate the naked human form without shame. I was exposed to a beautiful diversity of people and ideas. But there were even some ideas that she couldn't escape simply because of the time in which she lived. One of the first things I had to confront was the fear of judgment. It took me a long time to shed the idea there was some literal, omnipotent father figure looking down on me from on high, judging everything I did. I'll admit, for a few weeks I entertained the idea that maybe I would be struck by lightning at least. Those feelings passed in a couple of weeks. However, for many years after, I would be forced to confront ideas that had been seeded in my head I didn't even know were there. For example, I recently saw a witch claim one could upset their deities by sharing pictures of them online without their deity's permission. Or that by some stretch of the imagination, by sharing your magical workings online, you are opening yourself up to spiritual attack. The idea there is a literal God figure sitting around someplace waiting to smite you is very much a holdover of indoctrination. Also, the idea there are folks out there who would not only be witching you, but that their curses had any actual power over you feels a little paranoid to me. This is fear, full stop. Once I decided that being a witch was my calling, I had another hurdle to overcome: the de-Christianizing of my spiritual perception of the world. It seemed every path I looked into had some kind of Christian element to it. Common themes like monotheism, demons, or other evil entities, and the hard line between good and evil. I decided I want none of that element in my spirituality and looked to nature for guidance. It has taken me many years to come to a place where I feel my spirituality is guided and reflects nature. And as a good witch should, I am forever evolving that perception. I also began to see the common themes on holidays and celebrations. I learned of the pagan origins of many of the traditions we still practice today, and how they survived in many cases only to help conversion along. Between my lover and I, we decided which holidays we would still include in our yearly celebrations, and which ones we would not. We've met little resistance about this. especially on Christmas, or as we now call it, Yule, or the winter solstice. For those cases, we essentially have our solstice celebration and a separate celebration with family that is hard set on Christmas. Instead of having a quiet, solitary ritual for most holidays, we brought them into the forefront of our family celebrations and even invite our friends and family to celebrate with us. The winter solstice is the biggest party of the year, but even more quiet, contemplative ones, like making flower mandalas on the beach for midsummer, have been a fun way to include our community. While I am not one to suggest I have all the answers, I cannot help but notice how beneficial it is to have a close relationship with the earth, as well as how damaging as it is to be disconnected from it. And I also cannot deny the recent surge of interest in the old ways, or beliefs more nature-centric, speaks to this idea. And the de-Christianizing of myself is something that I could have a long fireside chat about. But for the sake of time, I will stop here. So my friends, I suppose that is all for today. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next week.